You're going to join in and say something sensible. What do you think? Look at me. Honestly, just don't behave. Pretend to be a farm dog. Well, welcome to a new Harry's Farm video. And yeah, lots of jobs to do at this time of year around the farm. And yeah, if you want to know what's going on here, we're just trying to expose this stone wall. So I've been going around just chopping these out. I'm going to come down with a man or two. This is what happens if you don't maintain sort of the hedgerow. You let it grow up, but unfortunately it has a habit of then knocking down the wall. As you can sort of see here, if you get a bit of sway with the trees and things, it starts to knock down the wall. So we're going to just expose this so we can get access to the wall and so we can maintain it. But in this video, there's been quite a lot happening in the farming world recently. I was going to just talk about the Minette Batter's report on farm profitability review that was delayed until after the budget. It's all very odd. It was announced a few weeks ago, and I've been going through that over Christmas and just going to go through some of the main points highlighted in that report, which is extremely good and extremely detailed. I'm also going to discuss a bit on the inheritance tax, a subject I haven't touched on quite recently for various reasons, but there has been this big announcement just before Christmas that they were upping the threshold from 1 million to 2.5 million to reduce the exposure for family farms to inheritance tax. So that is going to be the theme of this Harry's Farm video. I'm going to just stop this because I think I need the man or two really just to get through. They're quite big, some of these brambles and things. Just want to tidy up the walls because fencing is a big thing for me, and it's particularly on the grass, and I'm going to explain why that is as well. So first of all, I'm going to take you to a different part of the farm where the sheep have arrived. We haven't had a lot of livestock on the farm this year, but 300 sheep have rocked up and they're right at the far corner of the farm. So let's go up there. This field is the furthest point on the farm, the top north end of it. And we have sheep. We have 320 sheep in here, mainly Cambridge and Cambridge crosses, all pregnant with lambs due at the end of March time. So they're going to be here for a few weeks. Just depends how long the grass sort of holds out, because this hasn't really been grazed this year, but there was a lot of grass. Once it started to rain in, well, August time, this grass recovered very well. I have this theory that this is actually a north-facing field, and it didn't get absolutely baked during the summer heat, and therefore it actually does quite well in the off-season. I don't know if that's right, but this is the brook, and this is the bit we've got to fence off, just this environmental legislation. They do not want the sheep to be drinking from the brook, which is just a nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And this is where the new fence is going to go. But it does strike me I'm taking an awful lot of my land out of production to hit this environmental ruling, and no compensation, no nothing. And it's all to do with pollution of the waterways. Well, this thing only flows a few months of the year. Sheep haven't been in here all years, but they're not exactly in it and bathing in it. And other things, deer, all sorts of wildlife will be peeing and pooing in there, no problem at all, whether I put a fence there or not. So yeah, real frustration that we have to do that. But yeah, just returning to that report. So Baroness Minette Batters did this report for the government on farm profitability review because there's a proper issue currently with farm profitability. And Minette Batter is a tenant farmer, and she was also president of the NFU. So very well placed to do this report. And it's a very good report, 155 pages. About 40 or 50 of those pages of annex at the back and reports and references. But yeah, the takeaways, just on the first bit, the foreword, two things struck me. One, when she was NFU president and dealing with the government and going into meetings, the basic attitude of the government, and this was Conservative government at the time, And the attitude of the government was farming doesn't matter. It's only 0.6% of the UK GDP. Therefore, it's an irrelevance. It doesn't matter. That Brexit happened, we came out of the EU with no plan for farming, which I found quite shocking that is the attitude of government towards farming. Farmers, basically, we're custodians of the landscape of the UK, is how I look at it. 70% of the land in the area in the UK is farmed. So we are custodians. Land is there for thousands of years, and we have this brief time on this planet, and we look after the land. And I think that is what UK PLC, huge asset we have, is the countryside, the spectacular countryside we have in this country, and it should be celebrated. And for the government to say that farming is irrelevant because it's only 0.6 of the GDP is just missing the whole point of farming. So the review is what we can do about it, and do we farm for the environment? Is that the most critical thing about farming into the future? Do we make British farmers globally competitive, unsupported by agreeing trade tariffs so we can supply more UK food, and all food has to be produced in the same way or better than UK food to be able to come to the country? And we all know what's happened with trade agreements there. Or do we look at it in more detail and produce a 25-year roadmap for how we get farming profitable again? Now, farm profitability. It's very variable for different sectors. I was mainly cereal farming for majority of the time on this farm, and that has got very tricky, shall we call it, since 2020. So a number of things happened. We seem to get an increase in weather extremes. The price of input, especially since 2021, have jumped dramatically. The cost of basically fertiliser, spray chemicals and seed to a certain extent are up 30% in the last 5 years. Cost of power and machinery and labour, that's had a dramatic increase over the last 10 years. They reckon about 50% up. But the grain price I receive for wheat I harvest has dropped, I would say, 25% since 2021-22, and it had an artificial peak because of Ukraine, and it calmed down, but then it's continued to calm down. And today, 30% of UK farmers are unprofitable, and because we've been unprofitable for several years, we're now at the stage where farming is becoming unviable. So there's a difference. You have an unprofitable year, oh dear, well, we'll get over that. When you have 2 or 3 on the trot, you become an unviable business. There's no longer any point growing crops. It's not a business anymore. And we're very close to that. Although I should say 2026, I look at the crops up there, huge potential, and everything's right, even though the price is down, that I don't think we'll be concerned with losses this year. I think we will be profitable. But there you go, that's farming for you. But they do these surveys on confidence amongst farmers, and that has taken a real knock, especially with the other elephant in the room, with the government attitude with inheritance tax, which I'll get to in a moment. So 70% of UK farmers are not at all confident of the future. Just 2% are very confident of the future. That's a terrible situation to be in. And the other thing about farming we should also mention, this is not a UK issue. These low grain prices are affecting everyone. The disruption in Europe, you can see the attitude of farmers there. They're getting very aggressive with some of their protests. The fundamental behind it is they can't make agricultural profitable. Same problem in the USA, same problem in Canada. We're all beholden to these huge grain trading monopolies of Cargills and ADMs, and they're setting the grain price at a price that we can't grow the crops profitably. And because we're price receivers, there's nothing we can really do about it. And we either have to adjust costs or just get out and give up production. And yeah, it's a worry, because in the UK, we're down to self-sufficiency of UK produced food is 65%. It was 78% in 1984. So it's this gradual decline. And that's a bit of a worry, especially when the report and the noises coming from government after this report that we want to support UK food and promote UK food. Well, if you've got a farming community that 70% they're not at all confident in the future and can't make money from growing food, that's not going to happen. The crazy bit about all of this is the agri-supply, the food industry in the UK is huge. According to the report, it employs 4.2 million people in the UK, which I found amazing. The food industry in general, all the supplies, catering, etc. It's about 150 billion, when the actual UK agricultural bit is about 10.5 billion. So food and supply and preparation is a massive business in the UK. So there is potential. We're not going to stop eating food. And what do we do about the future? And I think, yeah, the trouble we've got at the moment is poor farmers just feel beaten up. The inheritance tax coming in November 24, announcing that budget, and coming in April 26, with no discussion, no nothing, completely broken promises that, you know, Keir Starmer getting up, so we're never going to touch that, we're not doing that. Steve Reid as well, Agriculture Minister, no, not touching that. And get into government, and hey presto, first budget, they go straight in, and not a lot of research done on it, and it was flawed from the start, and the process started, and it's terrific that it's now changed. The threshold has gone from 1 million to 2.5 million. But talking to farming friends, the damage has been done. One, because it gave an impression that there was a government we had at the moment was completely out of touch with UK agriculture and how farming works in this country. And that's going to get a lot to get over. And then, you know, while they announce the change in the inheritance tax, they then say, oh, drag hunting, that's going to stop. And what is this pursuit of anything that has been on for hundreds of years in the countryside? I just don't understand why they're having another poke at an area that isn't, in the global scheme of things, is not really the issue of the moment. But from nowhere, oh, we're going to get rid of drag hunting, cease all hunting and anything to do with hunting, when it's a tradition in the countryside, and the minimal amount of foxes being caught. They are a pest of the countryside, and it's hard to farm with a huge population of foxes. But anyway, that's another subject. But it's just the lack of confidence when you realise this government was not in tune with what happens. But just getting back to inheritance tax, the trouble was that was announced in November, huge protests, and it came fairly obvious that they weren't going to do an immediate U-turn on this. So farmers who have farmed for generations the same patch of land suddenly had to get into tax planning when there was no need before. It's not as though this was a sudden rise from 10% to 20%. This came from nowhere, from a base where there wasn't inheritance tax on farmland. And I know a lot of people say, well, you should be paid taxes like everyone else. The thing about farm, it is this generational thing, and the value of the farm, I can't say it's an irrelevance, but it almost is, because it's never on your accounts. If you're a custodian of this countryside and your great-grandfather farmed it and then you farmed it, then the value never came into it. All you're thinking is, what can I do with this or that field, could do that. You change your farming practices, but that is what your destiny is, to be a farmer. And it's not to sell land or change your business. And that has been like how it has been for generations, until wallop, we're going to charge you inheritance tax, anything over a couple of million. And you have these businesses that are hardly making a national wage, with these huge millions suddenly inheritance tax, and someone has had to look at the value of the farm. So that is what the consternation in the countryside when it was announced and what's happened. So a lot of people have made unnecessary plans to minimise it, and there was, the talk of it. So I'm very glad that's gone. And I get quite a lot of comments saying, you only bought the farm for inheritance reasons. And I have to say, I do get wound up with this. That was least of the thoughts I had when I was buying a farm. A little bit of background might be useful here. My dad was younger son on a family farm up in the Yorkshire Dales, and he pursued a different career. But my holidays, when I was from 11, 12, were all on the family farm in Yorkshire, Bentham. And I used to go up there at every opportunity. And it was a working farm, it was tough. It was on ground quite steep like this, we're just going up here. And sheep, cattle, did a bit of milking, and they did quite a lot of trade in calves. Veal business was sort of part of it, I have to confess. And this is, 72, 73 sort of period. And I used to help out collecting the calves for all the dairy farms. Everybody had dairy. You had this mixed farm, including dairy. And the produce of a dairy is not only milk, it's calves, because obviously the cows are pregnant. You quite often put them with a Hereford bull or something, and the male calves went off into the meat trade. They'd either be grown into bullocks or sold as calves or whatever. But we collect them from the farms, and part of my job was keeping those calves together before the markets. And then it was Lancaster Market, Skipton Market, Bentham Market, and I used to help out on the markets, bring them into the ring, take all the, it's what you do with a 13, 14-year-old. It's great fun, lots of action, getting them up in the trees, lorries. And that was my introduction to farming, I suppose. And after school, didn't do very well. I then went into farming, worked on a dairy, a beef rearing farm. Dad said, you really ought to study farming. So I went to agriculture college and off we went. And I had a very good time. Started with sheep in the 80s, realised I couldn't really scale because there's a lot of work with sheep, and I couldn't scale, I couldn't grow quick enough, because I also was a grain trader at the same time. So I went arable direction, and we took on land quite quickly. I was 1,500 acres by about 91, 92. And I'd done all right, property and other things. And we bought a farm in 94. Really good farm, local, and it had a house on it, but it wasn't somewhere we really wanted to live, and we did various things. And I had an offer for the farm, I think it was 2001 or something. Evo happened in 98. That was just a hobby. I had cars, got to know a few journalists. Evo happened, that was an amazing opportunity. But we sold the farm we'd bought in 94 and bought this farm in 2002. At no point does inheritance tax even register, not even today really. I never even think about it. Perhaps I should think about it, because my main issue right now is how do I make the farm profitable? I've got more immediate problems than inheritance tax, and I'm quite unusual in farming that I am a farmer with his own land that started from nothing and didn't sell a company to buy a farm, do a lifestyle. I came from it, from herding sheep around Skipton Market, Lancaster Market, Bentham Market, right from grassroots, and somehow found myself in a position where I could buy a farm. Evo sort of brought a car collection together and made the house a bit fancier than perhaps when we first bought the house in 2002. But that's all Evo did. It was not a sort of roll over, let's get rid of inheritance tax, I'll buy a farm. I work the land, and that's what really interests me. I still find it fascinating how this grass has come back. Even after that terrible summer for grass, it comes back, it just gets on with it. Sheep are grazing, these are all going to lamb in March time. And I just love the cycles. It's wonderful being connected to the countryside. And going forward, why I'm doing all the fencing and getting those stone walls together, because if we can't make farming profitable for growing food, next year, end of this year, fertiliser prices are going to go up 20%, because this government is going to introduce a carbon tax on fertiliser. And so it makes it less profitable to grow crops. It's just relentless, the pressures on arable farming. And yet meat consumption is going up. 18% of UK people are going to increase their meat consumption. And I think we're going back to basics on our food. We've got addicted to highly processed food. It is 50.7%, I think, of our diet in the UK, compared to that to 13.4, I think, percent in Italy, and 14.2% processed food in France. Those countries we visit because their food is so good, because it's pure. And that is what is actually happening in the UK. We are going back to authentic food, I believe. And I've got a lot of grassland here. And if I had a pipe dream, James Rebanks, I really admire. He's up in the Lake District. Fantastic books. His books, Shepherd's Tale and things, that is exactly how my upbringing was in those 70s, working exactly the same sort of farms, working those hills, working the sheep. That is the life that I knew. And almost, I don't want to replicate, but that is, I think it's a wonderful way of life. The custodians of those hills, and that is why our British countryside looks like they do. But he's got belted galloways. I would like to introduce beef back here rather than sheep. Sheep are a lot of work. They're not my favourite things. They got me into farming, but they're a lot of work. And they like running about and things. Cattle, I just think they're more majestic animals, really enjoy the breeding of them. And belted galloways we could probably keep out all year long. And no fertiliser on this, it would be sustainable type of farming, producing quality beef would be a pipe dream. We've got a lot of grass on the farm. Could that be the solution? And then perhaps the crops, I'm very impressed with leaving the land a year and then putting cereals in. These crops look terrific. Whether that's just the season or not, well, we'll find out when next year rocks up. But I'm locked into countryside stewardship schemes with this enhanced overwinter stubble and things until December 2028. So that's sort of locked away, but that is what I'm sort of planning long term, go into cattle. So there you go, quite a lot to discuss in this Harry's farm, and lots of changes. And what does the future hold for us? Well, something has to happen to make farms profitable again. I cannot see the grain price suddenly going up 30-40% over the next year or two, but I can see our diets changing and getting purer and us caring more about what we're eating. And that's what I hope the future holds, and that's why I'm looking at livestock production. I think it's coming back. If you just look at meat, their losses quadrupled, I think, this year. Corn lost over 100 million in the last 3 years. The alternative protein market is not working. Authentic food is the way forward. So there you go. Quite a deep dive on this Harry's farm, but I thought it was useful to end 2025 on what's happening in agriculture. I hope you enjoyed it. More videos coming next year. Thanks so much for watching in great numbers. The numbers on this channel have increased 54% in 2025. Here's to another successful year in 2026. Thanks for watching.